Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel. Today we've got something different going on. I've done Kane a favour, I've picked an engine up for him. It filled the Volvo. It's a GM engine. It's a 6.2 litre V8 diesel, one of the mechanically timed ones, good for about 300 horsepower apparently. Let's show you the engine. It's a monster. Right, so here she is. This is the GM 6.2 litre V8 monstrous lump that we've got here, with an alternator that can power a small village, and it's just massive. It weighed a ton. It's definitely made handling in the Volvo a little bit, well, let's say interesting. We're just getting ready to strap it up and use the crane and lift it off this giant car transporter trailer that we've had to use to transport it back. And this is the gearbox that came with it. I'll talk more about the gearbox later on, but this is an absolute monster of a gearbox as well. So yeah, let's set the camera up and we'll show you extracting the engine from the trailer.
So, we're going to give you a brief rundown of the 6.2, and we'll start at the top of the engine up here. Crouch down a little bit so you can actually see my hand. So, this is the intake. There is a stud that comes off here, and there is a rather large saucer that goes on the top that was last spotted in Roswell during the 60s. The little valve that you see here actually connects to these two breathers to the rocker cover, and any excess gas is basically released and pumped back through so that you get as little oil sort of loss as possible. This is your top radiator outlet, and you've got your bottom one just down here, and then just here that you might be able to see is the outlet for the heater, and this abortion over here that looks like something that belongs on a bathroom tap is the secondary return for the heater. We're going to change this to AN pipe work, maybe a bit of silicone, more than likely a lot of stainless, and make it look rather pretty. The main line that you can see here that comes around is to the fuel pump, which is located smack bang in the centre of the V just here. This is the bleed off return that goes back to the tank. Fuel pressure sensor is just there. This is the accelerator action. The accelerator cable is going to come over from here and plumb in just here, and as we can see, the action is nice and smooth. The interesting thing about this one is on the back end over here we've got a little baffle plate with a heater in it that is to preheat fuel before it goes in if you're running in a cold environment. That's not the plan with us. I think what we're going to do is we're going to change out this primary pipe here for some nice AN stainless with aluminium fittings, and work it from there. The high pressure fuel lines have been run and they're all in reasonable condition, but again I think a little bit of jiggery pokery and cleaning up on them, and possibly a little bit of numbering so that we can make it reasonably idiot proof is going to be our plan. We have a small pump over here that we have no idea what it does just yet, because we haven't referenced the GM manual, but it's on the to-do list. Theory so far is it's either a air conditioning compressor or it's a oil pump. And then you might be able to see just down this part of the engine here, just behind the alternator, is the power assisted steering pump, but we'll get to that in a minute because it's a completely different design to Land Rover, and is actually quite nice if a bit of a mare to get to. The alternator, as you can see here, is the genuine one that was fitted to the vehicle, when obviously it was in whatever GM vehicle at the time. It is large enough though that I think it might power a small town somewhere in the south of Dusseldorf. Depending on the condition, we're going to test the output, and if it's all good and it gives us sort of the power range that we're looking for, and we're going to test the amperage so we know exactly what we're getting out of it, we'll probably leave this in position after a little bit of a clean up and service, and maybe inspect the bearings as well. Front fan's going to go, because we've got no need for it. It's going to sit too far forward, and we're going to go for a nice sort of twin 6-inch fan setup on the radiator. Belts as well, these will all be changed for new, and we have an entire new gasket set for this, but we'll come to that shortly. So this is the pump. We are not entirely sure what it does just yet. There's a small part of me that thinks that this may be a air conditioning pump. If this is an air conditioning pump, I think what we might do is we're going to modify it so that we can have a onboard compressor, and what we'll probably do is put a sort of standard compressor outlet somewhere near the back of the vehicle, so that if we ever need to, the tyres can be pumped up, or you can pump up your trail tyres. So that's the general idea with this. As you can see, just underneath the pump that we don't know what it is, this is the fuel pump. This is the high pressure line that comes off here and goes into the this is the low pressure fuel pump, or the lift pump. This is mechanically powered off the crank on this side and then runs into the high pressure fuel pump up here. This is the radiator outlet. As you can see, this is rather ugly and is not what we're going to have. When this is finished and this is in, we're going to have a nice bit of beautiful silicone, a nice bit of swaggered stainless pipe, and then this is going to go into the radiator of a TD5. Unsure whether or not, with the size of the engine, that the TD5 radiator is going to cool it, hence why we spoke before about fitting the two 6-inch fans, but we shall see. It's going to be a little bit of an adventure, a little bit of a touch and go sometimes about what we're going to do and how we're going to do it, but for the most part we shouldn't have too many issues. And yeah, that's about it for the front end. We'll talk a little bit more about these right here, which is the heater plugs. These are a CH32 heater plug. They're not the kind that are going to be kept on the vehicle, I'll be perfectly honest. What we're actually going to do is change these out for either a spade type connector or the same ones, and get the correct heater plug connections to go on here. Again, these are the high pressure fuel lines that are coming into the top of the injectors. The injectors on these, weirdly enough, being American, are actually Bosch. Something that I didn't know until I did a little bit of research and had a deal with a really nice chap over in Germany who works for a company called Mike and Frank's. If you are thinking of ever doing a rebuild on one of these, Mike and Frank's in Frankfurt, they have everything, and if they don't have it, they can generally get it within about 6 to 14 days from the States. This is the oil breather just here that you can see in shot. As you can see, that comes over and then feeds up into the manifold here that is just out of frame at the moment. But the idea behind this is that rather than having just a conventional one that goes to atmosphere, you have it come through a set of 2 valves and then condenses and goes back into the system. That's something that's going to get looked at. I'm not entirely sure whether that's going to be kept at the moment. The potential other option that we're going to look at is a catch can, and then that feeds back into the air intake, so that we're not feeding any oil or not burning any oil, to try and improve the emissions a little bit, which on something of this size is quite a novel concept. Okay, so now we're around the back of the engine. As you can see here, we have a monstrous flywheel. I'm not going to lie, that is about 1.5 inches thick. It kind of worries me with the amount of torque that's going to go through it, but then again, it's a learning curve. The starter that you can see here is quite a substantial size and has had to be braced, which also fills me with a great deal of faith regarding the torque that this actually produces. Up at the top here we have the vacuum pump. This is driven off the crankshaft and goes down into the bowels of the engine, and as you can see, Mr. Mouse decided to make a bit of a mess there. This is required, and we need to keep this because the braking system, for those of you that don't know, on the Land Rovers and the old type Range Rovers is a vacuum driven system of either a vacuum pump on the 200 and 300 TDI systems. On the petrol systems, it was plumbed into the manifold, the intake manifold, with a one-way valve, so that it would draw a vacuum to assist the servo. So that's going to be kept. The only thing we're going to do is probably going to change this port on the top here, and make a nice little adapter that will branch over into our brake servo. We have the lovely bit of plumbing on the back here that you can not quite see, but we'll get round to that eventually. And then here we have the preheater that preheats the diesel for cold environments, going into the squiddly diddly right there in the middle. That is the high pressure fuel pump. We also have the secondary sensor here that I'm not entirely sure what it does at the moment. I'm going to be perfectly honest. I'm not going to try and bullshit you, but I don't know what it does. And as you can see, these are the two crankcase breathers that come off and then recirculate into the intake manifold. And that about does it for the back end, apart from this wonderful conversion plate that has been, I'm going to say, cast by the marks, and then it's been cleaned up. Either or it might have been machined. Once it's cleaned up a little bit more, we'll sort of know. This is tapped to receive a Rover V8 bell housing. Luckily enough, what we actually have on the LT77 is a conversion plate that does a LT77 bell housing to a Rover V8, so that will just bolt up beautifully into there. So the final bit that we're going to talk about before we start pulling this engine apart of any unnecessary bits, and I think for the most part we're going to pull apart a lot of the aluminium so that we can get that nicely refurbished. Going to use a vapor blaster for that, give it a nice clean finish, clean up the engine, probably do the same with the rocker covers as well. Heads on this are going to be ported and polished. Some people disagree with porting and polishing and say do one or the other. I would say that if we were running a petrol V8, I would just port them to keep the rough surface finish in order to create the tumbling of the vortex, in order to suitably mix the petrol and air before it goes into the chamber if we're running carbs. Because this is diesel, I want as smooth as airflow as possible, especially because this is going to be twin turboed. So I think we're going to go for porting and polishing on that. The outlet up here we're going to change out. This you can see down here is the the conventional oil filter would be screwed onto the bottom. There's been a blanking plate put on the bottom, and there's been two pipes put into the side. These then feed out into a remote oil filter that on the Land Rovers is normally located somewhere around about here on the engine, but in this case what we're going to do is we're going to do remote oil filter with a inline thermostat and a 13 bar oil cooler, because if we can't cool this sufficiently with the radiator, I think keeping the oil at a nice cool temperature as well, within a sort of optimum range of about 88 to sort of 98 degrees, is going to give us a lot more power, and it's going to make the engine a lot happier. So we're going to start pulling this down now, and take off any unnecessary ancillaries that we don't require, as well as the alternator and any unnecessary weight, so that we can make this a little bit easier for sort of shoehorning into the Defender. Yeah, and that's about it really. So this is the gearbox that's come off the back of the 6.2 diesel V8 engine over there. That is the naturally aspirated version, not the 6.5 that was used in the Humvee, and also produced 165 brake as standard for the military. This model produces about 162, and we're going to be pushing for about 300 twin turbo setup eventually. Remote oil cooler and a water intercooler as well. So the gearbox that's come off the back is the LT95. Bit of an unusual gearbox from Land Rover. Normally they did the R380, the LT77. This one in particular has the transfer box and the gearbox all melded into one. These were used on 3 vehicles. They were used on the Land Rover Defender V8, primarily for the military, because these gearboxes are pretty much bomb-proof. They were used on the Range Rover Classic, and they were used on the 101-inch forward control, which is also a military vehicle. This one's in relatively good condition. There's no wear on the synchro meshes, and all the gearing is in good condition. She's a little bit dirty after spending most of her life underneath a Range Rover Classic. And the rear output shaft and brake, handbrake module are missing from the back, as well as the selector, as you can see up there. But for the most part, it's in good condition. Unfortunately, this isn't going to be used in our project vehicle. We're going to be using an LT77 with an LT230 transfer box and 3.54 ratio differentials with disc brakes all around, because trying to stop that is going to be rather interesting. So yeah, if you're in the market for an LT95, kindly contact Dab. So this is my D-Reg 110 project. It's been a project now for probably about 12 to 18 months. Initially the idea that we were going with was a 4-litre Rover V8 with a twin turbo setup that you're going to see in a minute, and it looks rather pretty. Problem is that I'm having trouble with the ECU. There's a couple of reasons behind it, one of which is because it's turboed, it needs to know what the map pressure is, or the manifold absolute pressure, in order to control the correct amount of fuel. The injectors have been upgraded. One of the turbos has already been fitted. The second manifold with the second turbo has not been fitted. I've been removed that to try and make it a little bit easier for going out. But the rest of it is all in there as it should be, and it's all been done correctly as well, which is actually quite nice. It's refreshing. The initial idea was using a TD5 intercooler, a TD5 radiator, and a separate oil cooler down here, which is now going to get reused on the 6.2 V8. The outside, your standard Land Rover really. I was going with a bit of a sleeper look on it, and I think that's what I'm going to stick with. It's the reason why it's in Stormway Grey. Lovely colour, one of the best colours that Land Rover did in my opinion. Gone for the LED headlights upgrades as well as the side lights and indicators. And then from there the idea is that basically this has panoramic windows on the back that you'll see a little bit closer to the time. The roof, not 100% happy with it. It's the old ribbed type roof with the non-alpine lights in it. So the idea is that's going to get removed at some point later on in the project. We're going to pull that off, we're going to fit the nice smooth TD5 roof, and then what we're actually going to do is go for a full moon roof on it with the alpine, but that's later. For now, we're going to show you the 4-litre V8 and then start pulling it out. So this is the 4-litre V8 engine that was originally in the Defender. Well, I say originally in the Defender. It wasn't the original one that was in the Defender. It did have a 2.5-litre petrol, but that went by the wayside many moons ago. Somebody put a 200 TDI in and I bought it as a bare shell. So this is the 4-litre Rover V8. As you can see, the one turbo there, second turbo was going to go over here, and everything was being done in AN fittings and being done properly. The problem is with this that the ECU is problematic to program. So what I found is a little bit easier is a bit of mechanical diesel for now, and that's why the GMC 6.2 litre diesel V8 is going to be going in. This engine isn't going to waste though. Once I've got the ECU programmed and fully operational, the plan of action is that the secondary turbo banks are going to go on, and this is going to go into a lightweight project, something like a 90 or a Series 3 ragtop. And then from there we'll just see how it goes. But for now, this puppy has to come out.
socket.